For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
You're on StratNews Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale. On the gist today, we are going to discuss a recent paper by former National Security Advisor and Foreign Secretary Shivshankar Menon, a well-known China specialist, author, and analyst. He basically has based this paper on his premise that internal developments in China has driven its external behavior in the past decade or so. You're on the gist. I'm Nitin Gokhale. I'm privileged to be joined by Shivshankar Menon. He needs no introduction, but I've already done that. Thank you very much for your time, sir, and agreeing to speak on this paper that you have recently authored.
Thank you for having me. It's good of you to invite me.
Thank you. No, it's a pleasure. So let me start with one of the points that you make in the paper about the Chinese definition of core interests, which of course in the earlier phase, earlier this decade or earlier last decade, in fact, it was Tibet, Xinjiang, and Taiwan. But now you also mentioned that Arunachal, which they call South Tibet, could become part of their core interest. Is that the possibility that you see happening immediately, or is just a threat that they will want to carry? I mean, sort of keep hanging over India's head.
See, when I look at the way they've presented their idea of core interests, it's been expanding over time. You remember, for a long time, there was a lot of publicity about how important South China Sea was to. And then after 2008, it got added to the, as you said, Tibet, Taiwan, Xinjiang. More recently, you hear Chinese officials describing Senkakus or Diaoyu with Japan, that dispute, as a core interest. And when you look at the sort of publicity about southern Tibet and the continuous use of the term southern Tibet over the last several years, it now is approaching that level of where next step is maybe some officials, some scholars, then officials start calling it core interest, and then it sort of enters the. So there is this expanding definition of China's core interests that we're dealing with, and it could happen. But as I said, it could happen. It depends really on how we manage issues between us, India and China, and what actually happens on the ground. Because I don't think they will define a core interest as something where they might be in danger of losing.
Or there's a pushback which they don't expect. If there's a pushback.
The real risk here is that, frankly, I mean, Tawang, Arunachal Pradesh is non-negotiable from an Indian point of view, and they are in no doubt about that. They've successful government. So do you want to define a core interest that you can never get? Exactly. That's not a very sensible political choice. But therefore, if they do, I don't think it would be very sensible, but there is an element of, that's why could and not will.
Yeah. I have not said must or will. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. But, turning to the paper itself, you speak about the internal drivers for their external behavior and also, how stability is at the heart of their governance. And that stability is because, as you mentioned in the paper, and as some of us who used to travel to China know, that the society is now grown more complex. Also, it's become harder to govern because of the prosperity that has come in. So, how do you see that internal controls that they would like to impose, or they would like to continue to impose on the people, and what will then happen for their external behavior? If you can expand for our viewers.
Well, I think both Chinese society and the economy have got much more complex as a result of reform and open door. And two or three things have happened. From the ruler's point of view, these have become much harder to manage. It's no longer a simple command economy. The economy itself is dependent on its links with the rest of the world. For it needs to export, it needs to import technology, it requires energy from the rest of the world. So in many ways, there is now a much more complex economy. Domestically also, there are now private sector, other actors who, the role of the state, while it's been expanded under Xi Jinping, is still, state-owned enterprises are still around 38% of GDP. The rest is not directly a command economy. So there is a much more complex, and a middle class has risen in China, which has different demands from the old China that the Communist Party was used to running. They saw that in Tiananmen, that frightened them. And since then, China has built the world's most efficient security state, actually, internal security state. Today, since 2011 or so, China spends more on internal security than she does on national defense, more on policing internally than she does on the army and the PLA as a whole. So that tells you something about internal stresses and concerns. And as the economy slows, which is natural after 40 years of unprecedented growth, it is reverting to mean now. As that slows, the instruments available to government to manage economy, society, etc., are much less. And therefore, you see the stress on stability, that stability overrides everything else. You see it in the behavior of the regime. You see it also in the way it has responded, say, in Hong Kong, to demands
Exactly.
for autonomy, even to be maintained. I mean, they've actually rolled it back.
Right.
So you've seen what's happening in Xinjiang, in Inner Mongolia, the stress on teaching Chinese now, no more local languages for instruction in schools, only on the side. The same in Tibet. So you see a hardening of posture, and you see a constant attempt to strengthen the party's role. The rectification campaign, which now extends into the state security organs as well for the last year. All this for me is signs of trying to find a new way of managing a much more complex society at a time when the rest of the world is pushing back, when the external environment has got much harder. So there is a sense actually of needing to do things quickly and to establish themselves. I think that's the price of a one-party state. That if you run a plural democracy, yes, I mean people will come and go and argue,
Yeah.
and there's public dissent, but you can see the public space for argument has shrunk
Sure.
since
Exactly.
2013, document number 9. And they're much more careful now in what they allow in, what they allow out. Foreign journalists, I mean, they've
Right.
restricted numbers. These are all signs of an inward looking but rise and an increasing reliance on nationalism
Oh,
to
yes.
maintain control and rule. So there is, to my mind, a legitimacy issue here, which is trying to be addressed. Whether they'll succeed or not, I don't know. I mean, it's because it's, as I said, they are in uncharted territory in every which way. In terms
Exactly.
of
So,
independence of the
so would
world.
2022 be a kind of landmark year because Xi Jinping would certainly, I mean, from all parameters that we know, he is going to continue for his unprecedented third term. Would that be a landmark year in many ways? That China's behavior will continue to become, I mean, it will continue to harden both internally and externally. How do you see this year?
The way I see it, and I argue in the paper, is that I don't think it's easy for China to roll back her assertive behavior externally. That not just because of rising nationalism, but because she has also phrased it and framed it as sovereignty. And sovereignty issues cannot be traded. These are not bargaining issues.
Exactly.
India-China boundary, for instance,
I was just going to come to that. Yes,
yeah, I
you
mean,
mentioned that that it's a sovereignty issue.
traditionally, the Chinese said this is an issue left over from history, which means not our fault. This is all the British and other people did this.
Yes,
And it also means that it can be settled by give and take, by
right.
negotiation, right? But now it's framed as a sovereignty issue. Southern Tibet is an inalienable part of China, etc., etc.
Exactly.
Uh, Once then, where's the negotiation? Where's the give and take?
Right.
He has the capacity to bargain. So you become much more assertive in asserting your rights. And
Right.
that shifts the ground. So, in a sense, what I'm saying is that these internal drivers have actually baked in a certain form of Chinese assertiveness today, including their own internal insecurities, but more than that, their external dependence, the rising nationalism, the desire for internal stability, and the fear that this might be shaken. All this together, therefore, drives what, as far as I can see, is very hard. The trouble is, once you reveal ambition, right? You stand up and say, I want to be center stage. I want to.
Exactly.
Then you can't, even if you roll it back, other people are going to deal with it as though it's a fact. And
It's
it is a
still
fact.
there. Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
still
Yeah.
there. You
That's right.
can't
Yeah.
undo
Mhm.
what you've said.
Exactly.
And China declared herself quite clearly over the last few years. So
Right.
now people are dealing with it. Some will go along with it, some will push back. Established powers are pushing back. You can see it.
Yes.
Others
Yeah.
who have problems with this assertive nationalism, the neighbors, the maritime Asia, certainly,
Right.
you can see there is contention going on all along China's periphery.
Correct. So even so India is in for harder times, you would say, and also other neighbors, because China sees itself surrounded by hostile neighbors, especially to the east, if not India. How so that will this year be then seminal year in that sense that they will become more and more assertive because they are pushing back against AUKUS, for instance.
Every year thinks that this is the year, just like every country thinks they are the center of the world, that everything is about
Yeah.
them. Yeah, we have to calculate everything as it affects us. I mean, that's normal.
Right.
2022 is going to be seminal for Chinese politics, yes.
Exactly.
I think because of the desire for stability, I don't see a real threat to Xi Jinping getting a third term, because I think that stability will drive that. Question is on what terms?
Yeah.
Who does he put into the standing committee? Who does he put into the Politburo? Who do the others manage to get in? How much? Because you can see signs, incipient, but you can see signs of unhappiness with this sort of assertive Chinese behavior abroad, with some of the domestic politics, and this huge personality cult that has been built up in China. So let's see. This is something the Chinese will work out among themselves. And we are not going
Mm.
to get into this discussion or
No.
argument. And and I don't think we should expect to either. I mean, I know people are tempted to say, "Oh, we play. You can influence and so on." Especially scholars in the West and
Yeah.
politicians in the West are tempted to play these games. But I don't think that's so. Yes, we do have an issue here. Doesn't mean we can't manage it. We are much more capable than we ever were before.
Right.
We have instruments today that we didn't have before. And also, I am not so sure. You see, the risk is China's priority is still Taiwan, as you said, her preoccupations, the East, South
Yes.
China Sea, etc. The fact is, however, that she might need simple victories. She might need quick victories. And where will she look for them?
Yeah.
She wouldn't look where she comes up straight against the US, the number one power
Yes.
in the world. She will look elsewhere. So, so everybody else better be careful. That would be my
Mhm.
advice.
And this includes India, definitely. Maybe we
But
are at the top of the list.
I mean, we've had a taste of it since 2020,
Exactly.
and
2020. That's right.
we haven't found a new equilibrium yet.
Sure.
We need to restore deterrence. We need to work at this. It's a work in progress, as the army chief said the other day. And it's something that
Yes.
takes time. It's not something you can do
Oh,
overnight or that suddenly and even if you agreed tomorrow with the Chinese, after what happened in 2020, you
yes.
would trust but verify and deter at the same time. And just verify
Exactly.
is not enough.
Exactly.
You would have to do all.
Yeah. Just before getting back to the Chinese, this internal drivers for external goals, just one question flowing from what you just mentioned about how India should be prepared. Do you think that this was not? Do you think? I know that you mentioned in the paper that this was sanctioned at the highest level, the action in Ladakh or Eastern Ladakh and Aksai Chin. But have the Chinese then miscalculated in a way because it has forced India to take steps it would have taken maybe in the 5, 6 years, 10 years time, and have beefed up security, infrastructure, and also tweaked the policy, sort of rebalance of its forces. Did they miscalculate there, the Chinese leadership?
I think they didn't achieve their goals. I mean, I can't
Exactly.
say what all their goals were, but certainly many of their goals I don't think they achieved.
Right.
Uh, and on the ground, they might have achieved some tactical gains.
Sure. Hmm.
But apart from that, I think the larger political goals, I'm not sure that they have achieved.
Right.
So, but we will not know for some time. As I say in the paper itself, these kinds of
Yeah.
calculations, you only know much later. We know for the 50s, 60s, and so on, because later people wrote memoirs.
Right.
Chinese wrote
Hmm.
memoirs and tell us what they were trying to do, what they were doing.
Yes.
We'll have to wait for time to tell us that. But I don't think they've achieved everything that they wanted. And it is still unfinished business on both sides, for them
Of
and
course.
for us. And therefore,
True.
that's where actually the danger comes.
Yes.
Because
This
having
is
miscalculated once, you can always miscalculate again. And a system
right.
which is so concerned with its own internal politics that it does
Right.
wolf warrior diplomacy is
Yes.
not calculating the way other people are calculating.
Exactly. So,
And
like, I mean, like you said, the Chinese are very slow in their memoirs. I mean, now we are hearing 1962 is being revisited from their side, and some accounts are being written. So maybe we'll get some indication of what happened that time, and maybe we'll have to wait another 50 years to know what happened in 2020. So we don't know what will happen there. But about our India's kind of getting closer to the US, and then US, UK, and Australia getting together, the world sort of uniting against the Chinese. Will that drive them to be more assertive, more nationalistic, or will they want to do some accommodation going forward? What's your sense?
But so far, they haven't chosen to accommodate. And I don't think that in 2022, at least until the party congress is over, you're going to see much change. Because a change would imply that what the Xi Jinping leadership has been doing so far requires to be adjusted.
Right.
And so I don't expect anything before the party congress. After the party congress, of course, logically, that's what China should be doing, is splitting the
Mm,
opposition, trying to
mm,
separate people out and work separately with them, and actually try and draw some of them into China's plans and work with them rather than. But we haven't seen that for the last 10 years. Uh,
yes.
and therefore, I started looking at the internal drivers, because it wasn't the
That's
external situation that forced China to do this,
Yeah,
to
exactly.
behave
No, no, it's
this
a
way.
I would say it's a landmark paper that you have done, because also the way they're now behaving, I mean, they're sort of trying to co-opt the Russians. Would that have some effect on how geopolitics in the region turns out in the coming 5 years or so? How
I
would the
think
Russians behave?
I think so, but it's an interesting relationship. The Chinese, on land at least, they're pushing at an open door. They're consolidating the
Right.
Eurasian landmass. They're doing BRI, building connectivity, but not just physical connectivity, roads, rail, fiber optics, but also, fiscal, financial, economic, other forms of connectivity, and exporting their own internal security model, actually, safe cities, and so on, surveillance, etc. So actually, it's an interesting situation. At what stage does this seem to be displacing Russia in her near
Mm,
abroad? And at what stage
yes.
is Russia, up to what point is Russia comfortable with this? That's a question that, frankly, only the Russians can answer. But I'm not sure that this right now both are united by Western pressure, especially by US pressure on Russia, which leaves
Yeah.
Russia with very few choices. As long as NATO, EU are expanding up to Russia's frontiers into her immediate
Yes.
periphery, Russia will feel threatened. Russia has legitimate interests, which she's trying to defend. She finds China useful for that. And the
Exactly.
other way, and vice versa as well.
True.
For us, it's an interesting problem because you'll notice the Russian investment in the relationship with us continues very
Oh,
strong.
yes.
I mean,
Correct.
Russians came
Yeah.
here. These are not small signs what they've been doing with us.
Right.
The Chinese seem to have decided about 3 or 4 years ago that India had already gone across to the dark side, to the US. They started saying that India is no longer non-aligned.
Yeah.
In other words, what they meant was we were not neutral between China and the US. And
Right.
it's their way of saying that India is not non-aligned, and therefore that restraint on Chinese behavior in 2020 spring, in
Yes.
Taiwan, for instance, that restraint was gone.
Go on. But then,
Because
would Russia play any role
that
in trying to? Sorry.
I don't
No.
think this is a very comfortable position for either the Russians or for us. Uh, and the Chinese would like to make it about themselves. But it's not about themselves. It's about, for us, it's about India's transformation, working with the Russians, working with whoever,
Yes.
with the US,
Yeah.
with
Exactly.
Iran, with whoever serves our interests. And I think that's
Exactly.
what we should keep doing, as we have been doing. If,
Yes.
and
Whether in Central Asia or where in Gulf countries, wherever.
or the Gulf countries or Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
I mean, we can
Exactly.
argue about we should do more here, there, more there, this, that. But basically, that's what all governments of India have been doing.
Exactly.
And will
No,
continue to do
then,
because we are India.
yeah, absolutely. Multi-aligned, you can call it new names from non-aligned to multi-aligned, whatever you want to call it.
Give it different names, but we do much the same thing.
Much the same thing, exactly. No, so I think the Chinese challenge for the world remains, and I think this paper really is illuminating in many ways because you have actually brought in a new dimension, at least to people like us on StratNews Global and our viewers, that China's behavior in the past decade is driven not by its relationship with the world, but by its own internal compulsions and internal
Well,
developments.
not
Thank you very
only
much
by
for your
its
time,
relationship.
Mr. Menon.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure
Thank
always talking to you. So that was Shivshankar Menon speaking about China, its relationship with the world, how India should expect the Chinese behavior in the coming years, and what happens internally in China is what is responsible for its behavior externally. Do keep watching Strat News Global. You know where to reach us for your feedback. And of course, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our social media handles are there for you to see on the screen. Do spread the word among friends, family, and colleagues, and keep sending comments so that we can bring you many more such topics for discussion. And the program that we do live sometimes between Tuesday to Thursday called The Gist. Goodbye for the time being.